It is never easy to give people bad news. We don't like it. We get really uncomfortable because we try to soften the blow. We maybe try to be vague about it. It makes us uncomfortable when other people feel uncomfortable, so we don't know how to deal with it when other people are feeling bad. You might have heard the story about a guy who went on vacation with his wife, and their mother-in-law was going to stay at their house because they had an old cat that was not doing too well, so the mother-in-law was going to watch the cat. But then the mother-in-law was not doing well. She was also old, and she was not doing well, so she was going to stay there, and then the sister-in-law, his wife's sister, also was going to stay in the house. Her name was Mary. So Mary was in the house with the mother-in-law and the cat. On the second day of the trip, the guy calls to the house. Mary answers the phone. He wants to see how things are going, and so he says, First thing he read out of the gate, he says, "How's the cat?" And the sister-in-law said, "Oh, the cat's dead." And he says, "Mary, come on, you're so insensitive. I can't believe you. That's not how you tell people bad news. You don't just blurt it out like that. You give it in stages. You should have said something like, well, the cat is stuck up on the roof. And then maybe tomorrow when I call, you could say, well, the cat's not doing so well. And then the next day you could say, well, the cat died." You build up to it. You don't just blurt it out like a 5-year-old. And she said, okay. Then he said, okay, well, how's your mom? There was a little pause, and then she said, she's stuck up on the roof. Yeah. So how do you deal with it when there's bad news? How do you deal with it when there are hard things to talk about? That is the context of this verse, these verses that we're looking at. If you just read this section, you don't necessarily maybe catch that. But again, as I was saying, this is part of a conversation. This is the upper room discourse. And if you were here last week, you heard me talk about this. Just before this, the end of chapter 13, some rough things are being talked about. Jesus gives the disciples some concerning, depressing news. Judas is going to betray him, or one of the disciples, they don't know who, is going to betray him. Peter's going to deny him. And worst of all, he's going to be leaving them to die on the cross. In fact, twice in chapter 13, Jesus refers to that by talking about, where I'm going, you cannot come. And so as you can probably imagine, this meal in the upper room that the disciples maybe thought was going to be this great time together, wonderful time of fellowship, has now turned into a den of depression. It's become a pretty dark, somber place. And the disciples are probably experiencing all kinds of emotions, mostly negative ones, worried, sad, confused. Who is going to betray Jesus? What's going on? What's going to happen? Why does Jesus have to leave? And Jesus gives them all this bad news. He doesn't really give a lot of details either, which is why it seems so weird when you start reading verse 1 of chapter 14 that Jesus says, "Let not your hearts be troubled." What? After you've told us all that, we're supposed to not have our hearts be troubled? It might sound at first like Jesus is like telling them to not feel their emotions, like scolding them for being snowflakes or whatever, although they're in Israel, so they're not going to talk about snowflakes, but, toughen up. But of course, Jesus is not forbidding emotion. I mean, they have just seen him a few days prior to this when Mary and Martha were grieving Lazarus. Jesus wept with them. And also, the day that he came into Jerusalem, what we know of as Palm Sunday, he comes into the Jerusalem on a donkey, but by the end of that day, at that night, this, again, just a couple days before this, Jesus again is crying. He's weeping because he knows what's going to happen and how Israel, the people, are going to be rejecting him and the nation's going to be destroyed. So they've seen this, and so I'm certain it's not like Jesus is some uptight British aristocrat trying to keep them, tell them to keep a stiff upper lip. So that's not what's going on, but it's also not happening. Jesus is not simply like, remember that song, "Don't Worry, Be Happy"? He's not giving them that kind of message. Just it's all going to be fine. Hey, these bad things are going to happen, but hey, don't worry about it. Just be happy. That's not what this is. Jesus is offering here, in these verses of 1 to 14 or 1 to 11, words of comfort. And there are real reasons why they shouldn't be anxious. And then that becomes also sort of words to clarify who he is. So we're going to talk about that this morning, though, what Jesus is offering as comfort and then what he is offering as clarity. And so let's begin by talking about comfort. Jesus offers comfort for the future in the first few verses here. And in fact, these first few verses of John chapter 14 are some of the most beloved in all the scripture. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house, there are many rooms. So this picture Jesus paints of a Father's house filled with rooms, a place being prepared for us, it brings us peace. It speaks to something deep inside us, especially when we're grieving, especially when we're fearful. We all want to know that there's a place for us. We want to know that we belong, that we're not forgotten. And Jesus emphasizes that. He knows the disciples are disoriented. He's just told them that he's leaving. They can't follow him, at least not yet. But now he reassures them. He is not abandoning them. He's not done with them. He's going to go and prepare a place for them. And so we read these verses today. We also sort of by extension see that Jesus is saying this to us. This is a promise to all of us, his followers. He's preparing a place for them and for us. And then in verse 3, he says, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. That's heaven. Jesus is talking about this future time when we're all going to be together, when we're going to be with him, we're going to be home. And so if you've ever lost someone that you love, these verses are often referred to in funerals, right? It's this promise that we're going to be reunited. And, here at Bethel, we've had a lot of loss in the last year or so. And so we keep going back to this passage. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. There's also another passage we refer to in funerals a lot where Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. And that's kind of the negative way of saying it, but the positive way of saying that would be we have hope, not just for this life, but also for the next. This life is not all that there is. There is a home, there is a place, there's a future. There's a comfort. That's the comfort that Jesus gives. And the truth is, he doesn't go on then and describe in detail what heaven is going to be like. I mean, wouldn't you like it if that were the case? But the Bible doesn't paint the picture of heaven with anything but a very broad brush. We know we're going to have glorified bodies. We're going to worship the Lord. We have some indications from certain parts of Revelations, looking at Genesis 1 and 2 that talk about the Garden of Eden before the fall. We don't know a lot, but we know some things. We know that there's promises about life is going to be better. There's not going to be tears or crying or pain. We're going to be with God. One of the things Jesus stresses here in John 14 about it is that he stresses the personal nature of all of this. He says to them, he's going to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house, there are many rooms. I'm preparing rooms for you. And maybe the only thing I could think of as a way of analogy would be like, imagine someone invites you to their house. And when you come, they roll out the red carpet for you. They take your coat when you come to the door. The house is freshly cleaned. They fix an amazing meal, particularly the thing that you like to eat. They take special interest. They talk about things that you're interested in talking about. They want to know what's going on for you. And when you leave, you're thinking to yourself, wow, I bet it took them a long time to put all this together for us tonight. Well, that's what this is like. That's what Jesus is saying, that he's going to leave these disciples in order to get everything ready for them. That's the comfort that Jesus offers. A promise for the future, a promise of heaven, a place prepared specifically for us. That this life is not all there is. There's something more, and Jesus is going to take us there. Okay, the conversation doesn't end there. The disciples still have questions, they're still confused. And so then Jesus goes on to clarify some things, not just offer comfort, but clarity. So, first of all, clarity about who he is. And we see this in verses 5 through 11, but especially verse 6. I'm going to point that in just a minute. Thomas asks him in verse 5, how can we know the way? And then Jesus answers with these words that if you've been in church, you've heard these a lot, right? John 14, verse 6, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Now, that's a very well-known passage, and it's worth looking at again, though. Let's walk through that phrase by phrase. Well, first of all, Jesus says, I am the way. Not the map. I'm not pointing to the way, but I am the way. I had a friend who went to become a hospital chaplain, and he told me about some of the training that they'd gotten and the things they were taught, all kinds of things, the hygiene protocols, what the coded messages were. And one thing that's sort of interesting that they were told that relates to this here is what they should do if someone asks them for directions. I don't know if you've noticed this. I think most hospitals do this, that if you ask someone for directions, they will not say it's there and sort of point the way and give them directions. They would say, well, you know what? I just happen to be going there. Let me take you. And they walk them to the destination then. Well, that's what Jesus is talking about here when he says that he is the way. He doesn't just talk about a way or point the way. He takes us there. He blazes the trail. He is the way to heaven, the way to an abundant life. He doesn't just give us instructions about it, 10 steps to finding your purpose or 10 steps to joy or whatever. He shows us. He goes with us through the gift of the Holy Spirit, his presence with us. It's like that hospital chaplain saying, come and follow me, I'll take you there. So by going with us and taking us, that sort of implies that he's going to do whatever it takes to get us there. He's going to walk with us, and if we get too tired or weak, he'll do whatever it takes to help us get where we are going. And that reminds me of that scene in The Lord of the Rings where Frodo and Sam are going up Mount Doom. I don't know if you remember this, but Frodo's got the ring. He's got to get it up the mountain, and he's struggling, and in fact, he falls down, but he has to go up there with that ring. And so Sam then says to him, come, Mr. Frodo, I can't carry the ring for you, but I can carry you. And so then he proceeds to literally pick Sam up and carry him the rest of the way, or pick Frodo up and carry him the rest of the way up the mountain. That's also what Jesus means when he says, I am the way. That he's going with us up the mountain and that he will do whatever it takes to help us get up the mountain. Now, it's true, he might let others help, right? He might send someone else to be the Sam that picks us up and carries us. Or like the hospital analogy, it might be like they're going and the person sees another hospital employee who's going to that same place, and you say, well, just go with this person there. They can take you. So maybe that's what happens. Our task as Christians is to show each other the way. Maybe to be that Sam for someone else, or to follow in whatever way Jesus calls us to do. And in fact, the early Christians were called the people of the way. Because we know the way. We know Jesus. We believe in him. We trust him. We follow him. Jesus is the way. And secondly, then he says, I am the truth. He doesn't just speak the truth, he embodies it. He doesn't say, I tell the truth. He says, I am the truth. And this is a theme in the Gospel of John, the truth. In chapter 1, we're told that Jesus came filled with grace and truth. In chapter 8, he says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And then here in chapter 14, he says, I am the truth. That is, if we want to know what's real, what's trustworthy, what's solid, we look to Jesus. He is the truth about God. He embodies and tells the truth about ourselves, the truth about this world. If you want to know what God is like, look to Jesus. If you want to know how to live in a confusing world, look to Jesus. You want to know how God feels about you, look to Jesus. So think about it this way. Imagine that you want to learn about somebody who's famous and someone that you really admire. How would you do that? How would you go about learning about them? Weird confession. It might surprise you, it might not. One of my heroes when I was growing up was Eddie Van Halen. He was the guitar player for the band Van Halen. And so I started playing guitar in junior high. And right at that time was Van Halen's first album dropped. It was just called Van Halen. And so I'm playing guitar, and he was just an amazing player. And from the first album, I was hooked. I got all their albums. I read every interview I could find with him. In fact, this picture comes from the 1981 Rolling Stone cover story about him. I know more detail than I probably should about this guy. But none of this, if you think about it, none of that really got me close to knowing the real person, Eddie Van Halen, right? I never got to, I went to their concerts several times, but I never talked with him. Imagine if I had that opportunity to go hang out with him, spend time with him in person, meet his family, go to his house, spend time with him in his backyard studio. I could learn more about Eddie Van Halen in a couple of days than I could in my entire lifetime of reading all this stuff about him, right? Now, this is not a good analogy, or it's not the best analogy, because the truth is, if you know much about Eddie Van Halen's story, he was not an honorable person. And in fact, to a degree, it was true that the more I learned about him, the less of a fan I became. I mean, as a good instrumentalist, but that's often the case with people, right? The people that we have, the heroes that we have, it's like the more we learn about them, the less fans we become. It seems like you might have heard that saying, if you're going to have heroes, that's fine. Just make sure that they're dead. Because if you have a hero who's still alive, you just might learn more about them and find out that they're not quite so heroic. So you meet them and you see their flaws, and then you get disillusioned. But with Jesus, it's a different story. The more we learn, the more amazing he is. Because he's not a flawed human being. He's God the Son. And the more we learn about Jesus, the closer we get to Jesus, the closer we get to God. Because Jesus is the truth about who God is. He's the truth. He teaches us about the truth. And then also, he is the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, this is not the first time that he said this. In John 10, a verse that I often quote, John 10, verse 10, he says, I have come that you might have life and life to the full, life abundantly. John 11, rather, just a few weeks ago we talked about this when he was at the tomb of Lazarus. He said, then, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. John 6, he says, I am the bread of life. This is a big theme in John's gospel, life. And Jesus says he is the life. He brings life. Believing in him gives us life. Not just life after death, but even life before death, like real life, good life, abundant life before death, a life filled with joy and peace and love. So then the final statement Jesus gives in verse 6 is, no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, sometimes people hear that, and right away our first question is, well, but what about people who live in other parts of the world and never heard about Jesus? What about people who grew up in a different culture with a different religion? What does this mean for them? That's a really important question, and it's probably worth a sermon in and of itself. But I just want to say, whatever happens to people in other countries, God is just, God is fair. He knows every heart. He knows every circumstance. Whatever God does in response to those situations, it's going to be right. We can trust in that. But that's not what he's talking about here. That's not what this passage is about. That's not who it's written for. Jesus wasn't speaking about the crowds. He wasn't speaking about people from the other side of the world. He was speaking to the disciples. And John wrote this gospel for Christians in particular churches. And so the question is, these are not people who've not heard about Jesus. These are people who had seen him, who had heard him, who knew about him, who knew his message. And that's true for us as well. So the question that we all have to deal with is not what's going to happen to those people over there, but what's going to happen to me? What's my response going to be with what I know about Jesus? And the only question then is, what do I do about that? And Jesus says, he is the way. If you want to know the Father, if you want to know what God is like, if you want to live a life of meaning, if you want to have hope, eternal purpose, then follow Jesus. That's the clarity that he gives. That's the invitation. And then the disciples, this is like this theme in the gospel. It's like this awesome saying. And then Philip speaks up with another question. He says, Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough. And if you look at Jesus' response to that, that brings us sort of this next piece of clarity that Jesus offers. And so Philip in verse 7 says, Lord, show us the Father, that will be enough for us. And Jesus' response kind of reveals what holy exasperation must look like. I mean, come on. Really? Have I been with you so long and you still don't know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his work. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or else at least believe on the account of the works themselves. Now, what Jesus says here in verses 9 through 11 are probably some of the most profound verses, theological statements in the Bible, because Jesus is claiming a unique kind of unity with God the Father. He's not saying that he represents God or that he speaks for God or that he acts on God's behalf. He's saying something more radical than that. He's saying that to see him is to see God, that the Father dwells in him, lives in him, that they are one. This is the doctrine of the Trinity at work. And even though we can't fully comprehend it, that this great mystery, we can at least understand what Jesus is saying here about this relationship that he has with the Father. I try to explain it this way. Jesus is saying that he and the Father share the same divine nature, the same essence, the same character. When you look at Jesus, you're looking at a perfect representation of who God is. In the book of Hebrews, the writer in chapter 1 puts it this way. He says, in these last days, God has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He, that is Jesus, is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. The exact imprint. That's who Jesus is. The perfect expression of God's nature. Paul says something similar in Colossians 1:15. Says that he, talking about Jesus Christ, the Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. And earlier in this gospel, in the Gospel of John now, chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus had said it plainly. I and the Father are one. And then here he talks about I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Now, why does this matter? Why is Jesus spending so much time emphasizing this, connecting himself with the Father? In this passage, in this context, it's because he knows how stressed they are, how troubled they are, and that they need an anchor not just tonight, but they will need an anchor in the days to come. And the union of Jesus and the Father, the God that they've known and worshiped their whole life, that can be that anchor. They're about to face probably the darkest hours of their lives. Jesus is going to be arrested. He's going to be crucified. He's going to be buried. And in those dark hours, they're going to wonder, did we get it wrong? Is Jesus just another failed Messiah, just another would-be prophet that couldn't deliver on his promises? But if Jesus and the Father are one, if to see Jesus is to see God, then even the cross isn't going to be the end of the story. But it's just part of God's plan. The Father is at work, even in what looks like defeat. Now, there's something else really important to understand here, and it's one of the reasons I believe that John emphasizes this in the gospel, that he has kind of this discussion in such detail. And that is that Jesus describes his union with the Father in the same way that he will go on to describe his union with us, with the disciples. If you jump down, if you've got your Bible there, just jump down to verse 20, and you'll see what he says. He says, on that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Same language. You are in the Father, or I am in my Father, you are in me, and I am in you. And also note that the way Jesus represents or speaks about this union with the Father and then the union that he has with us, Paul also talks about this. Colossians 1 verse 27, he talks about this mystery that he's been called to proclaim, sort of this message that he's bringing to the world, not just to the Jews, but to the Gentiles. And that mystery is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Jesus tells Philip and us that the Father dwells in him, the Father does his works through him, and then he goes further in verse 11, he says, believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or else at least believe on the account of the works themselves. In other words, if you're having trouble with the theological claim that I'm making here, just look at the evidence. Look at what I've done. The blind see, the lame walk, the dead are raised. Where do you think that power came from? The works themselves bear witness to Jesus' unity with the Father. And that's why he can offer comfort in the midst of bad news. That's why he can tell his disciples to not let their hearts be troubled, because the God of the universe, the one that they've seen in Jesus, is with them and will always be with them. And the God of the universe is with us, is with you, and will always be with you. So where does that leave us today? So we started out with that joke about how awkward it is to tell bad news. Don't quite know what to say. Jesus deals with the bad news of this night, the Last Supper, by not avoiding the hard truth, by not sugarcoating it, but by giving the disciples something to hang on to and giving us something to hang on to when we go through dark nights. He gives us a promise about the future, that there's a place prepared for us, that he's going to come back for us. And he gives us clarity about who he is. He's not just a teacher. He's not just a prophet. He's not just a good man. He is the way to God. He is the way to the truth about God, the life that comes from God. He is one with God. So, what is troubling you today? What is the bad news that you're having to work through? What's making you anxious or afraid or confused? Jesus says the same thing to you that he did to the disciples. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. He's preparing a place for you, for your loved ones. He's shown you the way. He's revealed the Father to you. He promises that wherever you are, he will be with you. So trust him. Follow him. Let your troubled heart find peace in the one who is the way, the truth, and the life.